Today I'm going to be talking about authors who could write about a tablecloth and I would read it. So these are authors who are automatic add to my TBR. These are authors whose new releases I don't even have to read the descriptions. I know their writing style. I know that these authors are 100% authors who I want to continue reading their works and are automatic. Before I even read the description, I have to read this. I definitely own several books by all of the authors on this list, and I own a bunch of them because they are favorites. They're ones I want to reread, so let's get into it. Just a disclaimer, I'm not including books by these authors that were either co-written or that the author illustrated but didn't write, just for the sake of clarity. So number one on my automatic author add to TBR list is Mary Lou. Mary Lou wrote the Legend series, which I absolutely loved in middle school. It was my favorite series. I loved reading it. The way she crafts characters is just so unique, and her plot lines, her stories, I just love it. I've read The Young Elites by her as well, Warcross, Sky Hunter, The Kingdom of Back, which is a historical fiction about Beethoven. It's actually really, really cool. And they're all just phenomenal. She is a solid author. Everything she writes, I just love it. She was actually the original author that I would read everything she wrote for. She was the first author that I was ever like, whatever she writes, I'm reading. She has another book, I think it's straight up called Batman, and then she has a series called Stars and Smoke, which I think follows pop stars / secret agents. That book series didn't sound super appealing to me, but it is probably something I will pick up, just probably not for a few years. A reason why I don't really want to pick that up is I really love the way that Mary Lou does fantasy. I think she's phenomenal at it. And this one is more fiction. Like I said, Mary Lou is so talented. It's still something that I will likely pick up in the future. I just have priorities ahead of it. On the horizon for Mary Lou, I'm pretty sure there is a third book coming in the Stars and Smoke series. So I wouldn't even be able to start it if I wanted to, because it's not a finished series, which breaks pillar number 2 of my reading philosophy. I talk about my reading philosophy in my previous video, so head on over there if you want to hear more about that. The second author I have that is an automatic read author for me is V.E. Schwab. She sometimes goes by Victoria Schwab for some of her younger, more young adult focused books, but this woman, I would read a book about her tablecloth. Her stories are so inventive and enthralling and immersive, and she makes her stories so unique, and they're incredible. So by V.E. Schwab, I've read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, the Shades of Magic series, the Vicious series, Gallant, Monsters of Verity, and the first series I actually read by her was the Archive series, and she also has a graphic novel version of Shades of Magic series, and I'm in the middle of that right now. But The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is probably my favorite story by V.E. Schwab. It's just the way that she crafted the story, and it's just so poetic and so lyrical, and I adore it. I am so excited to jump back into this book in the near future, but this book kind of cemented I will always read what this woman writes. And then earlier this year, I read the Darkest Shade of Magic series. This world is crazy. It's so cool. Again, the way she writes characters, the way she writes Lila Bard specifically, phenomenal. But we have Kel, Lila, and Rye, and I'm so pumped because she has another series. This world actually made me break my first and second pillar. So she has another series called The Fragile Threads of Power, and I own it. I have not read this book. It is not finished, and I bought it. At least it's paperback, but I just knew this world that she crafted and created is one I would love to revisit, and she's doing a spin-off, and it would shock me if I didn't like this series just because I love V.E. Schwab and I love this world. I think I've said it enough times. So this was a safe break of the philosophy. V.E. Schwab has a few other young adult based books. She has The Mirror Witch, Cassidy Blake, Spirit Animals, and Everyday Angels. Of all of those, I only think I'd get to Cassidy Blake if I was going to go back and read them, but all of her newer stuff that she's coming out with, like the Darker Shades of Magic series, Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, all of those automatic reads. And then she has some exciting books on the horizon. She has Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, which I'm so pumped for. She has a book on her Goodreads titled Black Tabs. I'm excited for that. And then she has Victorious coming out, which is the third book in the Vicious series, which I'm excited about. I don't know when that's supposed to come out, but I'm pumped for that. And then there's slated to be a third book in the Archive series, which I mentioned earlier is the first series I ever read by her. So she has a lot on the horizon, and I'm looking forward to it. The number 3 author on my authors I automatically add to my TBR is none other than Suzanne Collins, our queen, our savior. She's phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal. She's so good. She also has another middle grade series called Gregor the Overlander. Once I finished the Hunger Games series, I immediately started reading that because I just needed more of her brain and her work. It's actually really good if you want to add more to your TBR. I highly recommend. She obviously has Sunrise on the Reaping coming out next year, which I'm pumped for. I said in my previous video, I will read anything this woman writes. She could write anything in Panem, and I'm gonna read it. She's just masterful with anything she creates. The critiques of society found in the Hunger Games will never not be relevant. And the Hunger Games in general is just a masterful review of the world, media, entertainment, and oppression. I can't say enough good things about it. So I'm gonna move on. Number 4 on this list is Karen Thompson Walker. Her writing is so sticky. It's just so sticky. It just sticks in your brain. And I remember thinking about her books for days after I read them. The first one I read by her was The Dreamers. It's about this sickness that makes people fall asleep for a number of months, and kind of just chronicles this town and like how different people are dealing with it. And as soon as I read it, I was like, I've never read anyone else write like this. It's just so unique. She also has The Age of Miracles, which I read for a book club a few years ago. Was also a very sticky book. I didn't love it as much as The Dreamers, but it cemented that Karen Thompson Walker is someone whose books I want to read. She has another book coming out called The Strange Case of Jane O, which I'm pretty sure is about a psychiatric patient, and I'm interested to see how this stickiness transcends to that book. Number 5 is Madeline Miller. Madeline Miller wrote The Song of Achilles and Circe, and just the command of language in Circe is off the charts. This is a character-driven book, follows the character of Circe, and I am someone who prefers a plot-driven book. It's just what I've always been drawn to, but this book has gone against any of that. It is so good. If I would have read this on a break from school, because I read this in college, I would have read it in one sitting. It is so good. Her writing, it's breathtaking. It's like nothing I've ever read. It's unbelievable. It's so good, and it scratches that itch of Greek mythology that I got from reading Percy Jackson when I was younger, and it's just such a nice advancement from that, going to books that were more geared towards kids to something that I can read now at this stage of my life and just absolutely adore and eat up. I also read Song of Achilles by her. I didn't love Song of Achilles as much, but it was still just something that cemented that Madeline Miller is an author that I want to follow. She has 3 books on the horizon. One is a Persephone retelling, which I'm so pumped about. One's called Tempest or The Tempest, but I'm sure they're gonna be phenomenal. Number 6 on this list is Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have never ever read about fictional characters that have felt so real. I read Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins first. That was the first book I picked up by her. And when I tell you that for the first half of the book, she almost had me convinced that this was a real band. She just makes such relatable, realistic characters that are so entertaining to read about. Her storytelling is so straightforward, but it's just like you can't stop reading it. You just keep wanting to know more and more. And they're characters that could live in our world that you could like Evelyn Hugo could be a real celebrity. It's just whatever her method is, it's phenomenal. I've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Carrie Soto is Back, Daisy Jones and the Six, and Malibu Rising, but she has a lot on her list still. I know she has One True Loves, Evidence of the Affair, I think Forever Interrupted, After I Do, and Maybe in Another Life. Of those, I would definitely read One True Loves and Maybe in Another Life, but I don't think I'll ever read One True Loves, even though it's a crazy concept because the main character has the same name as me. And it's just a weird thing where I don't love reading my name because I feel like it makes it hard for me to picture the story and enjoy it as much. But clearly with The Dark Artifices, that main character has my name, and I was just fine. On the horizon for TJR, she has Atmosphere coming out in 2025 about a female astronaut. And I'm not someone who loves historical fiction. It's just not something that I've really gravitated towards over the years, but recently I found myself liking it more and more, and I have TJR to blame for this. She just, like, her strategy or her method for doing this, her formula, it works. I completely understand why she's blown up recently. I mean, she has a lot of talent, and I get it. Number 7 is a really popular author. Everyone has heard of her. It is Sarah J. Maas. I've read ACOTAR and I have read Throne of Glass. I read ACOTAR a few years ago, and then I read Throne of Glass actually just this past April and May, and this series is amazing. Sarah J. Maas is very talented. It's very obvious to me why she's so popular. The world she crafts, the character relationship she develops, and just the fantastical way she like weaves her stories together. It's amazing. I will read everything this woman writes. I don't love a ton of spice in my books. I don't really enjoy reading spice. However, for the plots that she generates and the characters and the high stakes of all her books, I will forever read everything she writes. Like, I will always read what she writes. So I've not read Crescent City yet. I know the last book just recently came out, but another reason why Sarah J. Maas is on this list is because I did get kind of spoiled, but please don't spoil me further, is because I know she's trying to do some kind of multiverse thing with Crescent City. I know in the last book there's some kind of crossover between her series, and I'm really intrigued because I don't feel like that is done too often, or at least in books that I've come across, I don't see it done too often. The other biggest multiverse type media that I can think of is the Marvel series. And so I'm really, really intrigued to see what she does with her next works. Obviously for Sarah J. Maas, she has some more ACOTAR books planned, and I've heard some rumblings that there's gonna be a 4th Crescent City book. So I'm intrigued and excited for that. I'm gonna check that this is actually recording. Okay, great. Number 8, I talked about in my previous video where I went over my reading philosophy, is John Mark Comer. I mentioned how John Mark Comer is someone whose writing I love so much. It's part of why I broke my first pillar and bought this book despite having not read it. He just writes in a way that is so relevant in today's day and age. I've read a few other books by him. I have read Live No Lies, Garden City, and God Has a Name. And then he has 2 other books, Loveology and Practicing the Way. Practicing the Way I actually have up there. And I think he's just a great author. I'm not sure what is on the horizon for him, but whatever it is, I will be picking it up. Number 9 on my list is Heather Holleman. I heard Heather Holleman speak at a conference I was at once, and after her talk, I realized that she was just somebody who I wanted to continue to hear from and listen to her words, and just an author that I really, really admired and someone I really wanted to keep up to date with. So she has a lot of books, but I actually own 3 of them, all of which I broke my first pillar for because after hearing her talk, I just knew. I just had a feeling, and she also is a Christian author, so she is not super readily available at my library. So she wrote Seated with Christ, which I have read, and then Guarded by Christ and Chosen for Christ, which I have not read, but they're very high on my list. She is such a relatable author, and I feel like the topics that she writes about are super of interest to me, and so she is an author and a speaker who I really enjoy. I'm not too sure what's on the horizon for Heather Holleman, but I'm sure whatever it is, it'll be on my list. And number 10 on my list is Victoria Aveyard. She is the author of the Red Queen series. I will take no hate on this series. I know that there has been a lot of hate around it the past few years, and I will listen to none of it. It was my favorite series in high school. I think it's phenomenal. I will accept no criticism. So she obviously wrote Red Queen, and then she also has a new series she just finished up called Realmbreaker. For Realmbreaker, I read the first book, but I actually didn't finish the second. I soft DNF'd it just because at the time I had picked it up, I wasn't really enjoying it, but it is definitely a book I want to get back to because I think if I had read it at a different time, I would have finished the book. I loved what she did with the Red Queen series, and I really, really enjoyed it, despite some people like hating the ending, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. I think she does a great job, and I am excited to dive back into Realmbreaker maybe in a few months or soon, but she's just an author that I have loved since high school, and so she's an author that I will always keep her on my radar, and anything she releases I will definitely take an interest in and probably add to my TBR. On her horizon, she has Tempest coming out, I think, in 2026, and I'm excited to read about that. So that wraps up my 10 must-read authors. However, I do have a few honorable mentions. My first honorable mention is Riordan. Riordan started my love for not necessarily reading, but for Greek mythology and mythology retellings in general. He was someone who's really formative to my reading development, my development as a young reader, and my love for reading. I actually still have my copy of The Lightning Thief from middle school. He has not made my automatic read authors just because I feel like I've kind of aged out of his books. They feel a bit too young for me now, which is really sad because I really didn't enjoy his work. And what specifically comes to mind is the Magnus Chase series. I read the first book and it wasn't as enjoyable as it would have been, obviously, if I'd read it when I was younger. But he is still so talented and someone that I'm really grateful to have read and that is still out there making these phenomenal books for middle school age kids, high school age kids. But I've read the Heroes of Olympus, which is the Percy Jackson Lightning Thief series, which I recently found out there's a 7th book that just came out, so clearly I need to go back and read that. There is the Disney Plus series, which I think I watched the first season of and need to clearly get back into because it's really good. I remember when the movie came out with Logan Lerman, which was amazing casting, but then it was not the greatest movie, so I'm glad to see them giving it the justice it deserves. I've also read the Kane Chronicles, so I have very much enjoyed Rick Riordan as an author, and I just never got around to Trials of Apollo. I will never say never, so maybe one day I come back around and read that, but he's honorable mention number 1. Honorable mention number 2 is Veronica Roth. You're probably most familiar with her for the Divergent series she wrote, but I've kept my eye on Veronica Roth, and she's slowly been creeping up in the quality of her writing. I think Divergent was a fascinating concept as a book back in like the dystopian boom, but recently she's had a lot of really good books. So I've also read the Carve the Mark series by her, the Chosen Ones series. She did a short story and kind of like a batch of short stories where a bunch of different authors wrote like one individual, but they all kind of have similar covers. Hers was called Arc. I've read that. And then I've also read most recently When Among Crows, which was phenomenal. There's a few books of hers that I haven't read. I haven't read Poster Girl. I haven't read the Far Reaches series, and I haven't read Arc Enemy because it's like ARK, which actually is a series that seems really interesting. So I might get back around to that. But most recently, When Among Crows and Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth blew me away. The concept of Chosen Ones was so good, and When Among Crows is a story that takes place just over one night, and it feels like this is an actual mythological retelling in some respects, and it was so good. So Veronica Roth is definitely an author I will continue to be watching because I think she's just getting better and better with all of her new releases. And then my last honorable mention is Cassandra Clare. Cassandra Clare, I remember, was huge a few years back with the Mortal Instruments series. I remember the movie coming out and seeing that. But I think Cassandra Clare is a phenomenal author by the way that she hooks all of her series together. So I've read by her the Mortal Instruments, the Infernal Devices, the Lost Hours, the Dark Artifices, all books that are woven together in the same world and are done really, really well. She also, in her series, the one series stars the children of the main characters in another series, which I think is not the easiest thing in the world to do, and she does a great job of it. However, she's another author that I feel like I'm kind of almost aging out of. I read The Last Hours. I think I said The Lost Hours earlier. Sorry about that. The Last Hours recently, and I enjoyed it. However, it does feel a touch too young for me now. Not to say that I did not enjoy them, but it just didn't feel the same as when I read them when I was a bit younger, and so I'm not getting as much enjoyment out of them. But again, still a great author. There's a reason she's on this honorable mention, but there are some books I still have not read by her that I probably will never get to. The Chronicles of Bane, the Shadowhunters Codex, Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, The Elder's Curses, etc. And then she has a new series called Swordcatcher, which is on my want to read list, so I will definitely be getting to that. And on the horizon for Cassandra Clare, I think I recall when I was looking at the Last Hours series, because she had released that, and then she also had, I think it's The Wicked Powers, was the name of another series I thought was going to be coming out after The Last Hours, but I just searched her whole Goodreads and couldn't find it, so maybe that's coming soon and she pulled it, I don't know. But I'm not too sure what's coming next for her. So that was my automatic add to TBR author list. Thank you so much for joining. Obviously, This was a big connection to my reading philosophy video, so head over and check out that video if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, and if you want to hear more from me, please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. I'm just surrounded by books, and now I have to put them all back on my bookshelf, and I don't remember where they went. Look at this dog. My little friend.